well, now focus in on those words with me, faithful and just. Faithful and just. Because if you're anything this morning, I hope it's this. And truthfully, this is one of the main reasons why we're doing this in our Understanding the Gospel series. Because what do those words, faithful and just, about God mean for us? Well, first, concerning faithful, the point is, concerning our sin, church, if we personally confess and admit that we're sinners and turn to Christ, then God is faithful to forgive us. He's faithful. Meaning God has promised that he so loves and forgives anyone of all their sins in Jesus Christ. He's promised that, and so he does that. And that is such good news, first, because that's then our hope, our trust, our reliance in God's promise, and that God has he said to us that he always loves and forgives us. But then also, second, that's such good news, church, because that means that you and I don't have to live with this crippling doubt that, well, maybe for me, God doesn't love me or won't forgive me. Or maybe he will just choose not to forgive this specific sin that I keep struggling with. No, the point is, it really is a promise from God in Jesus that anyone who comes to him in faith, he loves and forgives. And so really, concerning God, it's not like he's unsure if he can or will forgive you. Rather, he's faithful always to fulfill his promise. And he always forgives in Jesus. And so that's amazing, but that's not even it. Because not only is God faithful, and so he will forgive us, but then John also adds that God is just to forgive us as well. Just or righteous. And that's significant because that means basically that God not only says he will forgive us, but now we know that God actually can love and forgive us. Because think about it, it'd be one thing if God, this God of love, loving light, wanted to forgive me and you, but because of justice or because a certain sin is so bad that he couldn't. But instead, the living God will and he can forgive always, because in his forgiveness, he doesn't just turn a blind eye to your sin or sweep it under the rug like some deceptive judge. Rather, as we've talked about a few times in our series now, God really does forgive us in justice, totally righteously and fairly, all because Jesus took our specific sins and dealt with those sins in full. Which means no one, not the devil, nor anyone else, can come to God and say, hey, that's not fair that you forgave this or that person. Or, hey, God, those sins are too deep or dark for you to forgive. Instead, if you trust in Jesus, since Jesus really took those specific sins, then God is just to forgive us as well. And again, church, you can sense that that's the heart of the gospel. And that's the answer to our second question of how does this relate to our sin in the center of the gospel. Concerning our sin, even as those in the light, we are still sinners, we are. And now it's also true, as we're going to talk about in a second, as we do genuinely know God, we do want to sin less. So we are people who really love our God and want to follow him. And if we don't feel that, then it may show that we don't actually know God in the gospel. But again, still as those who do know God, I hope you're seeing this really is not a passage teaching perfection or you're not a Christian. Instead, in the light, we're with God, we're in this together, and our God is faithful and just to always forgive us due to what Jesus did on the cross. Or to say it another way, our fellowship with God and with one another, now and forever, I hope you know, is totally secure. And not because of you and me, but because of Jesus and that cross.